that crowd, that pro-Netanyahu, pro-Likud crowd have been gunning for me for 25 years, since the day I came here, essentially.
You're now reaching MAGA viewers, you're reaching America First viewers. Do you think that's at the heart of the campaign that's against you?
It's a mystery to a lot of people why someone like Laura Loomer, who really doesn't have any other credentials except for a large following on social media, why she's being listened to. It's because if you have to dominate every corner of the world militarily all the time, you will be at war somewhere all the time.
And he's finally here, Trita Parsi, joining us from Washington, D.C., Iranian-born author, commentator, and co-founder of the Quincy Institute. Trita, you are such a hard man to get a hold of.
Sorry about that. I'm doing my best.
No. Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate you. I have so much I want to ask you. We have little time, but I'm going to try to squeeze in as much as I can. One question that I'm curious about, Trita, is obviously you've been in Washington. You've been in the American Capitol for, 25 years now? You've been doing work for 25 years now or so. But your profile has very much expanded lately. I mean, you've been doing a lot more interviews. Your face is a lot more present on social media. And I'm curious to ask you about what has changed the last little bit. I mean, obviously there was the war on Iran, but I want to hear how you've been reflecting on all of this, on your expanded profile, let's say.
I'm not really sure, because at the end of the day, when the JCPOA was taking place, I was doing a lot of interviews. One thing that may have changed is that the entire media landscape has changed. Very few people are actually watching the mainstream media, cable news any longer. They're watching YouTube shows. And I've been very active on those because I found them oftentimes to be much more worthy and valuable in terms of good conversations, good questions, instead of this tired, conventional wisdom and assumptions that oftentimes are repeated over and over again in these mainstream media interviews. So I frankly suspect that it's mainly because of that, but I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about it, because at the end of the day, during the JCP, I was doing a lot of interviews, and it was over a period of 2 years. So it was very intense back then as well. But I agree with you, there's something different this time around.
And how is public reaction to I guess what you're observing now in terms of your outspokenness and in terms of what you're providing public opinion at the moment versus what was happening in what the interviews that you were giving during the JCPOA, as you were saying?
I mean, both of them, frankly, were very positive. The thing that I think, again, is a little bit different this time around is the number of young people that stop me on the street or at the Whole Foods or at the gym or at other places. And it's really fascinating because...
At the Whole Foods, really,
At the Whole Foods, at the line at the Whole Foods.
Like for a selfie?
And well, I mean, not going that far perhaps, but they want to talk, they want to express their gratitude of kind of, the work I do, trying to explain what is happening, want to talk about what they think may happen or hear from me if I will give them some sort of uncensored views. And that has happened to a far greater frequency than it did before, and particularly the fact that it's young people. Again, this is why I suspect that this has more to do with the fact that young people are following the news. They're just not watching mainstream news any longer. They're watching these other shows. It's also very fascinating because many of these shows, as you know, are longer form. They're not these 5-minute hits on mainstream media. And despite the fact that the attention span of people usually tends to have become shorter as a result of social media, simultaneously you have these podcasts, and some of them are like 2, 3, 4 hours long. And people are watching it. I find it really amazing, and it seems to be primarily young people.
But here's the thing. Here's what's going to lead into this, because there's a darker side to this as well, Trita. I guess the more exposure you get, naturally, the more criticism you'll get as well. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I think there was the piece in the Free Press that got a lot of attention, and I will ask you about it, and we'll delve into it as much as we can. But has it ever gotten to this point? The piece that I'm referencing has basically called for your deportation. It asked the question of, will the U.S. deport Trita Parsi? And I don't know if that has ever, that kind of criticism or that kind of attention has been focused on you from before. I mean, that has also come with the fact that you've been reaching these younger voices and reaching these new audiences, isn't there? There's a link there, I'm sure.
Undoubtedly. And I think the specific link when it comes to those attacks, because that crowd, that pro Netanyahu, pro-Likud crowd have been gunning for me for 25 years, since the day I came here, essentially, to Washington. And they've tried to cancel me, deplatform me, silence me throughout this period. This is the first time they're going for deportation, though, I have to say. So clearly they're escalating their efforts. But I think the one specific change that has caused them more panic is not necessarily reaching the younger crowd. It is reaching the conservative crowd. The fact that I've gone on Steve Bannon's show, that we work with the American conservative, and as you know, Quincy Institute is by design a transpartisan organization. Our entire effort is to build bridges between the anti-war left and the anti-war right. There's been collaboration between them in the past, but it has tended to be episodic. We try to institutionalize that collaboration to make sure that the effort against these endless and needless wars becomes much, much more substantive and significant than what has been before, by being able to build bridges and synergies between the left and the right, anti-war left and the anti-war right. And if you're a neoconservative, you have to be worried about that, because you've already more or less been chased out of the Democratic Party, and now you're also kind of being chased out of the Republican Party, because young Republicans tend to be extremely negative, not just to neoconservatives, but also increasingly towards Israel itself. And they see me as being one actor in that field. Whether they are overstating my influence or not is a different story, but nevertheless, it seems to be part of the reason why they've really escalated matters against me.
Here's what I find interesting. What you said about reaching new audiences, and the fact that you talk about going on Steve Bannon's podcast. You also went on Tucker Carlson's podcast. And this is the thing. It's like you're now reaching MAGA viewers. You're reaching America First viewers. And do you think that's at the heart of the campaign that's against you? Do you think that it's because you're reaching out to these voices that you may have not been able to reach out to them before?
I think it's essential, to be frank with you, because...
Okay, you think it's essential?
I think it's essential because once you have Republicans turn against, not in let's just follow Trump way, but actually in a way in which is actually coming from themselves, that there is a stronger belief system that leads to into a direction of rejecting these type of foreign interventions and involvements, and this type of impunity that the United States is providing Israel, or has provided Israel for so many decades. Once that happens, that is a huge blow to the pro-Likud networks here in Washington and to Israel, because so much of what Israel has been able to do is because of this carte blanche that it's been getting from the United States. And if they lose the left, if you ask Netanyahu, he wanted to lose the left. He's the one who actually shifted Israel's strategy towards just focusing not on the Jewish American community as the support base, but rather the evangelical Christian base as the support base for Israel, which tends to be much more conservative and Republican. They're losing that. They're losing it for a whole set of difference, mainly because of what they themselves are doing, but also because of voices like Bannon, like Tucker, and others who are starting to ask questions that, frankly, almost never were asked on the American right.
Well, I think that at least when it comes to your opposition to the war on Iran, then you can make the argument that you're actually in alignment with much of the American public opinion, versus what some powerful lobbyists or powerful people in D.C. may think or may have a position. And I think that is something that I also want to ask you, is that do you feel like your positions are almost America first in a way?
Well, certainly at the Quincy Institute, and with the grand strategy that we advocate for, which is called Restraint, it is centered on American national interest. Now, whether it falls into this political figuration of America first or not, it's perhaps a different question. But we would say that our foreign policy recommendations do absolutely put America first, but not in the way of thinking that we need to be in conflict with other countries all the time, or in the thinking that, we are in a zero-sum relationship with other countries all the time, but rather in the sense of looking at how America's foreign policy has been for the last couple of decades and asking ourselves, hold on, have we forgotten the fundamental question? Does this actually serve the US's national interest? Why are we in certain places? Why did the United States provide support for the war in Yemen, for instance? What was the actual national interest of the United States that was at stake in that internal fight in Yemen that warranted America to involve itself militarily? These are fundamental questions that were simply not asked. The blob is just going on auto drive when it comes to just being involved in almost every conflict around the world. But to ask that question is not necessarily to say we define ourselves against Saudi Arabia or against Israel or against anyone else or against allies. It's about the fact that we have to go back to the fundamental core of foreign policy, which is it is supposed to serve America's interests. And I think you are starting to see this line of thinking increasingly on the right and on the left. Because when you look at, for instance, what Mamdani is saying during his campaign, when they kept on asking him, what about this in Israel or what about that foreign policy? He kept on going back to the fundamental point, I'm here to serve the people of New York.
And I ask you that question, Trita, because it leads me to I want to hear from you who you perceive as your opponents in this. Like who are the ones that I guess want to silence you, want to deport you, want you out of the picture, let's say. So if you're saying that, okay, that it does, where you stand and where the Institute stands, it very much stands with American interests. And I guess that makes sense to the average listener. Is like, okay, well, you know, if I'm against the bombing of Iran and he's making the argument against why we shouldn't bomb Iran, then who are the ones that basically stand in opposition to your views?
I would say that our main opposition are those who are favoring a grand strategy that says that the United States needs to have military hegemony and dominance globally. And that is the only way to make the world safe, and that is the only way to make America safe. In our view, that is the strategy that has led the United States into these endless wars. Because if you have to dominate every corner of the world militarily all the time, you will be at war somewhere all the time. And that is the history of the United States for the last couple of decades. So that approach is what we believe has constantly brought the US into these wars. It is supported oftentimes by regional allies who want the United States to fight their wars for them, whether it is Israel that wants to have a strong military presence in the region, or in the past, other countries in the region who felt that America's security umbrella was beneficial for them and as a result wanted the United States to have a grand strategy that was centered on setting up these security umbrellas around the world. We think ultimately that has been bad for the US, but it's also been bad for these specific regions oftentimes. At least in the Middle East, I think it's very clear. When the American security umbrella has started to recede, we've actually seen regional states move towards their own diplomacy to try to figure out, okay, how can we shoulder our own security without the support or aid or reliance on external actors? And in the long run, that is the best and most stable and enduring form of security.
In light of the war on Iran, I want to ask you about how can we view, I guess, neoconservatism in American politics today? I mean, what kind of shadow has the war on Iran left on neocons? And I ask you this, it's because in your I think it was your first book, Treacherous Alliance. One of the people that you focus on is Michael Ledeen, who was a leading Iran hawk, and he was a neoconservative analyst. But actually, earlier in his career, during Iran-Contra, he was advocating for closer ties with Tehran because it benefited Israeli interests. And then he switched later on. And that switch is something that I want to talk about with you in terms of how you see neoconservative politicians react when it comes to the Middle East, but specifically as well Iran and Israel too.
I think you put your finger on something very important when it comes to this, because it was really fascinating to see how many of these neoconservative voices back in the 1980s were completely aligned with Israel already back then. It's just that Israel's position on Iran was 180 degrees different from what it has been since the mid-1990s. Because back then, the Israelis were the ones that were telling Washington to talk to Iran, sell arms to Iran, and don't pay attention to Iran's anti-Israel rhetoric because it is ultimately not decisive. So back then you had people like Michael Ledeen actively involved in reaching out to what they called back then Iranian moderates, getting this channel set up that ended up becoming the Iran-Contra scandal, in which wasn't just talking to the Iranians, they were actually making sure that the United States would sell Iran very advanced missiles to be used against Saddam Hussein's army. You go forward 5 years, Israel shifts and suddenly says that Iran is the biggest threat in the region, that Iran and Islamic fundamentalism coming from Iran is a threat to the US and to Israel and to Western society, civilization. And simultaneously, you have individuals such as Michael Ledeen and other neoconservatives doing exactly the same shift. And now suddenly they became the tip of the spear, the forefront of the you cannot talk to the Iranians camp. You should not engage with the Iranians. You should not have anything to do with the Iranians except for doing regime change there, sanctioning them, and eventually, of course, advocating for the bombing of them, which again was exactly the Israeli position. To see how Israel shifted its position and how some of these neocons shifted their position to constantly be aligned with Israel, I think is a very fascinating study, and one can dig deeper and to see exactly why that alignment seems to be so perfect.
So then how would you view the legacy of someone like Lindsey Graham, for example? And he was a very loud voice and advocate for the war and the bombing of Iran.
I think Lindsey Graham, at the end of the day, is going to come down as and be remembered as one of these members of the Senate that is deeply responsible for so many of America's most devastating foreign policy missteps, from Iraq to all of the other interventions in the region, and of course, perhaps more than any of the other missteps, the Iran war, as he was one of the most effective advocates in Washington, particularly directly with Trump himself. He had become better than any of the other senators in being able to set up a really good relationship with Trump, despite the fact that they differed on some issues. He was nevertheless very close to Trump and a voice that reinforced everything the Israelis and Netanyahu was saying.
I want to move on now to I guess the campaign that was against you, Trita. We've there's the Free Press article that I talk about, which got a lot of attention, but there was also big voices on social media that attacked you. One of them is Laura Loomer, and I this all happened recently. The Free Press article is just last month, and I want to get a sense of how you are taking all of this in. I mean, is this something that spooked you? I know that the State Department did come out with a statement saying that they're not looking into revoking your green card, but is that enough? Because they also said we're not looking to revoke it at this time. So does that mean that there is another time that could be a possibility? So I just want to hear you out in all of this.
No, look, Laura Loomer, of course, has a huge platform, and she has been effective in getting the president to do things at times, including firing people on his own staff. It's a mystery to a lot of people why someone like Laura Loomer, who really doesn't have any other credentials except for a large following on social media, why she's being listened to. And she started this campaign against me, I think, a couple of months ago, and started tweeting against me. And again, it's very much because of the fact that I and Quincy show up on the conservative media circuit in a way that other folks that are critical of U.S. foreign policy interventions may not necessarily have or even intend to. Now, of course, it's important to understand, I doubt very much that this is going to be some sort of a one-off campaign on their end. I think they're going to continue to try. But
So you think this is just one round, Trita?
I think this is just the first round. And it's probably not the first round. They've done other things as well that is not as public. But bottom line is, this is not something that they're going to give up on. But I do think, however, that contrary to their own calculations, in which they were hoping that that story actually would lead to an investigation and would help move things towards them attacking my green card, it did the opposite, because there were also other voices, not just in public, but also inside the administration, that inquired, and it appears to have led to a scenario in which the State Department, in a very, very unusual move, very quickly came out and denied the story. This is not something that the State Department usually does. It doesn't comment on these things, period. But it did this time. So I think this episode backfired on them. And of course, there was also quite a large public backlash against this. But I don't think that in any way, shape, or form means that they have given up.
But that's the thing, isn't it? Does that thought scare you? The fact that you're saying it's the first round, or you believe it's the first round, does that scare you of what could come next? Do you have any fears about what could come next?
It doesn't scare me, but certainly it doesn't make me happy at the end of the day. It's just that there's a reconciliation, I think, with the fact that in the last 25 years that I've been here, I've seen a gradual deterioration of how debate is conducted in this country and in this city in particular. The gloves keep on just getting off. And once you think that the gloves are off, you find out that there were actually another layer of gloves that also could come off. And it's just become worse and worse. And as a result, it's just what you have to deal with. The thing that will not happen is that I will in any way, shape, or form give up or go silent or not speak out. And I think another thing, incidentally, is that there are probably not a lot of people in Washington in the think tank space that was as vocal as I was against Israel's genocide. There were plenty of other people who were very vocal and deserve a tremendous amount of credit, but they were not necessarily in the think tank space. And I think that also made me stand out a little bit, because it's just fascinating to me how a genocide in the heart of the Middle East could take place for 3 years. And there are people in the think tank space in Washington that are supposedly Middle East experts, and they have yet to even say a word about it, let alone calling it a genocide, but even just address it. And you haven't seen that. So that is unfortunately the normal in the think tank space in Washington when it comes to the Middle East. But the Quincy Institute and some of our allies are clearly breaking with that.
But isn't this interesting, or something worth noting is that the Trump camp, I mean, Trump himself in January 25 said that he will bring free speech back to America. The Trump camp is very much against cancel culture. Yet here we are. I'm talking to you in a moment where there is very real attempts to cancel you and your voice.
Yeah, unfortunately, you have this scenario in which all sides claim that they're in favor of free speech until it becomes inconvenient for them. And then we see these type of efforts. And we saw a lot of it during the previous administration, certainly not driven to the best of my knowledge by the White House, though. But unfortunately, this is just a trend that has been happening in the United States for quite some time. It has oftentimes gotten worse. There's been some moments in which, at least in the cultural space, I would say right now, it is not as suffocating as it was before. In the political space, depending on the issue, it is still very, very tense and suffocating.
I'll end with this question, Trita, because I know you have to go. But in your Substack response to the article and to the campaign, you said, quote, "Good luck deporting an idea whose time has come." So where does all this attention and these threats, I guess, leave you as Trita Parsi, the person, let's say?
Leaves me right here. I'm in my office. Your team came in here and set up their cameras to do this interview, and we're continuing to do exactly what we did before. It hasn't changed anything, except for perhaps making us realize how important, even more important than we may have understood this is, because if the other side is willing to go to these extremes, it reinforces, in my mind, and I wrote about it in the Substack as well, that they really don't have an argument. If they had an argument, they would argue that argument. They would put it forward, but they don't. They instead resort to increasingly desperate and excessive measures, such as trying to get someone deported because they cannot handle the argument that he or she puts forward.
And I'll leave you to here. But Trita, look, you have to promise me that the next one we'll do it in person. And it'll be a longer one too, because I still have a lot more questions.
Happy to. You just have to come to my office.
I will do that. I will do that. Trita Parsi, thank you so much for coming on Real Talk. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
So that was Real Talk with Trita Parsi. There's more Real Talk on the way. So all I'll ask you to do is to make sure to subscribe to our Real Talk channel. That's Real Talk by MEE. We'll see you soon.